do. We were trying to balance two equities. On the one hand, making it so that people had data portability, the ability to bring their data to another app in order to have new experiences in other places, which I think is a value that we all care about. On the other hand, we also need to balance making sure that everyone's information is protected. And I think that we didn't get that balance right up front.
Thank you. I certainly concur with the statement of the COO, as affirmed by you today, that you got the balance wrong. And then regarding Cambridge Analytica, the fact that 300,000 individuals or so gave consent, but that certainly didn't mean they gave consent to 87 million friends. Do you believe that that action violated your consent agreement with the Federal Trade Commission?
We do not believe it did, but regardless, we take a broader view of what our responsibility is to protect people's privacy. And if a developer who people gave their information to, in this case Alexander Kogan, then goes and in violation of his agreement with us sells the data to Cambridge Analytica, that's a big issue. And I think people have a right to be very upset. I'm upset that that happened. And we need to make sure that we put in place the systems to prevent that from happening again.
Thank you. I think it may have violated the agreement with the Federal Trade Commission, and I'm sure that will be determined in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from New Jersey. Recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Zuckerberg. For all of the benefits that Facebook has provided in building communities and connecting families, I think a devil's bargain has been struck. And in the end, Americans do not like to be manipulated. They do not like to be spied on. We don't like it when someone is outside of our home watching. We don't like it when someone is following us around the neighborhood, or even worse, following our kids or stalking our children. Facebook now has evolved to a place where you are tracking everyone. You are collecting data on just about everybody. Yes, we understand the Facebook users that proactively sign in are in part of that platform, but you're following Facebook users even after they log off of that platform and application. And you are collecting personal information on people who do not even have Facebook accounts. Isn't that right?
Congresswoman, I believe that
Yes or no?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure that, I don't think that that's what we're tracking.
No, you're collecting, you have already acknowledged that you are doing that for security purposes and commercial purposes. So you're collecting data outside of Facebook. When someone goes to a website and it has the Facebook like or share, that data is being collected by Facebook, correct?
Congresswoman,
yes or no?
That's right, that we understand in order to show which of your friends.
Yeah, so for people who
like
don't even have Facebook, I don't think that the average American really understands that today, something that fundamental. And that you're tracking everyone's online activities, their searches. You can track what people buy, correct?
Congresswoman,
you're collecting that data, what people purchase online. Yes or no?
Actually, if they share it with us, but Congresswoman,
because it has a share button, so it's gathering. Facebook has the application. In fact, you patented applications to do just that. Isn't that correct? To collect that data.
Congresswoman, I don't think any of those buttons share transaction data. But broadly,
but they
disagree
track
with
you. You're collecting medical data, correct, on people that are on the internet, whether they're Facebook users or not, right?
Congresswoman, yes, we collect some data for
and you're collecting, you watch where we go. Senator Durbin had a funny question yesterday about where you're staying, and you didn't want to share that, but Facebook also gathers that data about where we travel. Isn't that correct?
Congresswoman, everyone has control over how that works.
I'm going to get to that, but yes, you are. Would you just acknowledge that, yes, Facebook is, that's the business you're in, gathering data and aggregating that data?
Congresswoman,
correct?
I disagree with that characterization.
You're not, are you saying you do not gather data on where people travel based upon their internet and the ways they sign in and things like that?
Congresswoman, the primary way that Facebook works is that people choose to share data. And they share
primary way, but the other way that Facebook gathers data is you buy data from data brokers outside of the platform, correct?
Congresswoman, we just announced 2 weeks ago that we were going to stop interacting with data brokers, and even though that's an industry norm, to make it so that the advertising can be more relevant.
But I think in the end, it's practically impossible these days to remain untracked in America for all the benefits Facebook has brought and the internet. And that's not part of the bargain. And current laws have not evolved, and the Congress has not adopted laws to address digital surveillance, and Congress should act. And I do not believe that the controls, the opaque agreement, consent agreements, the settings are an adequate substitute for fundamental privacy protections for consumers. Now,
Gentlelady's time.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady's time.
Let that stand. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent that I put my constituents' questions in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie, for...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here. When I first got into public office, the internet was really kicking off, and I had a lot of people complain about ads, just the inconvenience of ads, trying to get in the cumbersome of the internet. I remember telling someone one time, being from Kentucky, a basketball fan, I said, there's nothing I hate worse than the 4-minute timeout, the TV timeout. It's flow of the game and everything. But because of the 4-minute timeout, I get to watch the game for free. So that's something I'm willing to accept to move for free. What you're not really willing to accept is that your data's just out there and it's being used. But it's being used in the right way. And it's funny because I was going to ask this question anyway. My friend, I was planning a family trip to Florida, and I searched a town in Florida, and all of a sudden I started getting ads for a brand of hotel that I typically stay in, at a great hotel at the price available to the public because it was on the internet, that I was willing to pay, and stayed there. And so I thought it was actually convenient. Instead of getting just an ad to some place I'll never go, I got an ad specifically to a place I was looking to go, so I thought that was convenient. And it wasn't Facebook, although my wife used Facebook to message my mother-in-law this weekend when we were meeting up, so it's very valuable. We get to do that for free because your business model relies on consumer-driven data. This wasn't Facebook, it was a search engine, but they use consumer-driven data to target ads to me. So you're not unique in Silicon Valley or in this internet world in doing this type of targeted ads, are you?
No, Congressman, you're right. I mean, this is ad-based business models have been a common way that people have been able to offer free services for a long time. And our social mission of trying to help connect everyone in the world relies on having a service that can be affordable for everyone, that everyone can use. And that's why the ads business model is in service of the social mission that we have. And I think sometimes that gets lost, but I think that's a really important point.
But you're different in that instead of getting just when I'm watching the Hilltoppers on basketball, the person advertising me doesn't know anything about me. I'm just watching the ad. So there's no data, no agreement, or no risk, I guess, there. But with you, there is consumer-driven data. But if we were to greatly reduce or stop, or just greatly reduce through legislation the use of consumer-driven data for targeting ads, what do you think that would do to the internet? And when I say internet, I mean everything, not just Facebook.
Well, Congressman, it would make the ads less relevant. So
if you had less revenue, what would that do to them?
Yeah, it would reduce, it would have a number of effects. For people using the services, it would make the ads less relevant to them. For businesses, like the small businesses that use advertising, it would make advertising more expensive because now they would have to pay more to reach more people and efficiently because targeting helps small businesses be able to afford and reach people as effectively as big companies have typically had the ability to do for a long time. It would affect our revenue some amount too, but I think there are a couple of points here that are lost. One is that we already give people the control to not use that data in ads if they want. Most people don't do that. I think part of the reason for that is that people get that if they are going to see ads, that they want them to be relevant. But the other thing is that a lot of what our business, what makes the ads work, or what makes the business good is just that people are very engaged with Facebook. We have more than 1 billion people who spend almost an hour a day across all our services.
I have 30 seconds, so I appreciate the answer to that. But so I didn't opt out, so forth, and all of a sudden I say, this just doesn't work for me, so I want to delete. You told Congressman Rush that you could delete. What happens to the data? It's there, it's been used, Cambridge Analytics may have it. So what happens when I say, Facebook, take my data off your platform?
If you delete your account, we immediately make it so that your account is no longer available once you're done deleting it. so no one can find you on the service. We wouldn't be able to recreate your account from that. We do have data centers and systems that are redundant, and we have backups in case something bad happens. And over a number of days, we'll go through and make sure that we flush all the content out of the system. But as soon as you delete your account, effectively that content is dismantled, and we wouldn't be able to put your account back together if we wanted.
Gentleman's time.
Well, thank you. My time is expired. I appreciate it.
Recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Zuckerberg. I wanted to get something in the record quickly before I move to some questions. You had suggested in your testimony over the last couple of days that Facebook notified the Trump and Clinton campaigns of Russian attempts to hack in to those campaigns, but representatives of both campaigns in the last 24 hours have said that didn't happen. So we're going to need to follow up on that and find out what the real story is.
Do you want me to?
No, I'd like to move on. You can provide a response to that in writing if you would. Let me ask you, is it true that Facebook offered to provide what I guess you referred to as dedicated campaign embeds to both of the presidential campaigns?
Congressman, I can quickly respond to the first point, too.
Just say yes or no. Were there embeds? I need to get to that because I don't have time. Were there embeds in the two campaigns? Were offers of embeds?
Congressman,
yes or no? Were there embeds offered to the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign?
We offer sales support to every campaign.
Okay, so sales support, I'm going to refer to that as embeds, and I gather that Mr. Trump's campaign ultimately accepted that offer. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Congressman, the Trump campaign had sales support, and
okay, so they had embeds. I'm going to refer to those as embeds. What I'd like you to do, if you could, we're not going to have time for you to do this now, but if you could provide to the committee both the initial offer terms and then any subsequent offer terms that were presented to each candidate in terms of what the embed services would be, that would be very helpful. Do you know how many ads were approved for display on Facebook for each of the presidential candidates by Facebook?
Congressman, I do not, sitting here off the top of my head.
Okay, let me tell you what they were, because I do. President Trump's campaign had an estimated 5.9 million ads approved, and Secretary Clinton 66,000 ads, so that's a delta of about 90 times as much on the Trump campaign, which raises some questions about whether the ad approval processes were maybe not processed correctly or inappropriately bypassed in the final months and weeks of the election by the Trump campaign. And what I'm worried about is that the embeds may have helped to facilitate that. Can you say with absolute certainty that Facebook or any of the Facebook employees working as campaign embeds did not grant any special approval rights to the Trump campaign to allow them to upload a very large number of Facebook ads in that final stretch?
Congressman, we apply the same standard to all campaigns.
Can you say that there were not special approval rights granted? Is that what you're saying? There were not special approval rights granted by any of the embeds or support folks, as you call them, in that Trump campaign?
Congressman,
yes or no?
What I'm saying is
okay.
that we would,
all right, if you're saying yes,
the same standard.
If you're saying yes, then I'll take you at your word. The reason this is important and the reason we need to get to the bottom of it is because it could be a serious problem if these kinds of services were provided beyond what is offered in the normal course, because that could result in violation of campaign finance law, because it would be construed as an in-kind contribution, corporate contribution from Facebook, beyond what the sort of ad buy opportunity would typically provide. The reason I'm asking you these questions is because I'm worried that that embed program has the potential to become a tool for Facebook to solicit favor from policymakers, and that then creates the potential for real conflict of interest. And I think a lot of Americans are waking up to the fact that Facebook is becoming sort of a self-regulated superstructure for political discourse. And the question is, are we, the people, going to regulate our political dialogue, or are you, Mark Zuckerberg, going to end up regulating the political discourse? So we need to be free of that undue influence. I thank you for being here.
Gentleman's time expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, for 4 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, do you mind for the record if I just answer the first point for
That's fine.
take 10
Go
seconds.
ahead.
When I was referring to the campaigns yesterday, I meant the DNC and RNC. So I may have misspoken, and maybe technically that's called the committees, but those were the folks who I was referring to.
Thank you for that clarification. We'll now go to Mr. Olson from Texas for 4 minutes.
I thank the chair. And Mr. Zuckerberg, I know we both wish we met under a different set of circumstances. When the story broke, you were quoted as saying, "I started Facebook. I run it. I'm responsible for what happens here," end quote. You said those same words in your opening statement about an hour and a half ago. I know you believe that in your heart. It's not just some talking points, some canned speech. Because of my 9 years in the Navy, I know the best commanding officers, the best skippers, the best CEOs have that exact same attitude. If Facebook was a Navy ship, your privacy has taken a direct hit. Your trust is severely damaged. You're taking on water, and your future may be a fine with a number per the Washington Post with 4 commas in it. Today, over $1 billion in fines coming your way. As you know, you have to reinforce your words with actions. I have a few questions about some anomalies that have happened in the past. First of all, back in 2012, apparently, Facebook did an experiment on 689,003 Facebook users. You reduced positive posts from users' friends and limited so-called downer posts from other friends. Basically, fed positive information to one group, another group negative information. The goal was to see how the tone of these posts would affect behavior. I will get in this Forbes article, the LA Times, about illegal human experimentation without permission. I want to talk about that. But it seems that this is disconnecting people. In stark contrast to your mission to connect people. Explain to us how you guys thought this idea was a good idea. Explain with people, give them more negative information, positive information.
Well, Congressman, I view our responsibility as not just building services that people like to use, but making sure that those services are also good for people and good for society overall. At the time, there were a number of questions about whether people seeing content that was either positive or negative on social networks was affecting their mood. And we felt like we had a responsibility to understand whether that was the case, because we don't want to have that effect, right? We don't want to have it so that we want use of social media and our products to be good for people's well-being. And we continually make changes to that effect. Including just recently, this year, we did a number of research projects that showed that when social media is used for building relationships, so when you're interacting with people, it's associated with a lot of positive effects of well-being that you'd expect. It makes you feel more connected, less lonely. It correlates with long-term measures of happiness and health. Whereas if you're using social media or the internet just to passively consume content, then that doesn't have those same positive effects or can even be negative. So we've tried to shift the product more towards helping people interact with friends and family as a result of that. So that's an example of the kind of work that we do.
Well, that's a question. I believe I've heard you employ 27,000 people, thereabouts. Is that correct?
Yes.
I've also been told that about 20,000 of those people, including contractors, do work on data security. Is that correct?
Yes, the 27,000 number is full-time employees, and the security and content review includes contractors, of which there are tens of thousands.
Okay, so roughly at least half your employees are dedicated to security practices. How can Cambridge Analytical happen with so much of your workforce dedicated to these causes? How'd that happen?
Well, Congressman, the issue with Cambridge Analytica and Alexander Kogan happened before we ramped those programs up dramatically. But one thing that I think is important to understand overall is just the sheer volume of content on Facebook makes it so that no amount of people that we can hire will be enough to review all of the content. We need to rely on and build sophisticated AI tools that can help us flag certain content. And we're getting good in certain areas. One of the areas that I mentioned earlier was terrorist content, for example, where we now have AI systems that can identify and take down 99% of the Al-Qaeda and ISIS-related content in our system before someone, a human, even flags it to us. I think we need to do more of that.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, for 4 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Mrs. Zuckerberg, I thank you for agreeing to testify before the House and Senate committees. I know it's a long and grueling process, and I appreciate your cooperation. I'm a mathematician that spent 20 years in industry and government developing technology, including algorithms. Moreover, my constituents are impacted by these issues, so I'm deeply committed and invested here. I'm going to follow up on an earlier question. Is there currently a place that I can download all of the Facebook information about me, including the websites that I have visited?
Yes, Congressman. We have a download your information tool. We've had it for years. You can go to it in your settings and download all of the content that you have on Facebook.
Well, my staff just this morning downloaded their information and their browsing history is not in there. So are you saying that Facebook does not have browsing history?
Congressman, that would be correct. If we don't have content in there, then that means that you don't have it on Facebook, or you haven't put it there.
So I'm not quite on board with this. Is there any other information that Facebook has obtained about me, whether Facebook collected it or obtained it from a third party, that would not be included in the download?
Congressman, my understanding is that all of your information is included in Download Your Information.
Okay, I'm going to follow up with this afterwards. Mr. Zuckerberg, you indicated that the European users will have GDPR protections on May 25th, and American users will have those similar protections. When will the American users have those protections?
Congressman, we're working on doing that as quickly as possible. I don't have the exact date yet.
So it will not be on May 25th?
We're working on it.
Thank you. Your company and many companies with an online presence have a staggering amount of personal information. The customer is not really in the driver's seat about how their information is used or monetized. The data collectors are in the driver's seat. Today, Facebook is governed by weak federal privacy protections. I've introduced legislation that would help address these issues. The My Data Act would give the FTC rulemaking authority to provide consumers with strong data privacy and security protections. Without this kind of legislation, how can we be sure that Facebook won't continue to be careless with users' information?
Well, Congressman, let me first just set aside that my position isn't that there should be no regulation.
Correct.
But regardless of what the laws are that are in place, we have a very strong incentive to protect people's information. This is the core thing that Facebook is about 100 billion times a day, people come to our service to share a photo or share a message or some content.
I mean, I hear you saying this, but the history isn't there. So I think we need to make sure that there's regulations in place to give you the proper motivation to stay in line with data protection. One of the problems here in my mind is that Facebook's history, the privacy, user privacy and security have not been given as high priority as corporate growth, and you've admitted as much. Is Facebook considering changing its management structure to ensure that privacy and security have sufficient priority to prevent these problems in the future?
Congressman, this is an incredibly high priority for us. When I was saying before that the core use of the product every day, about 100 billion times, is that people come and try to share something with a specific set of people, that works because people have confidence that if they send a message, it's going to go to the person that they want. If they want to share a photo with their friends, it's going to go to the people who they want. That's incredibly important. We've built a robust privacy program. We have a chief privacy officer.
That's a little bit off track from what I'm trying to get at. The privacy protections clearly failed in a couple of cases that are high profile right now. And part of the blame that seems to be out there is that the management structure for privacy and security don't have the right level of profile in Facebook to get your attention to make sure that they get the proper resources.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for 4 minutes.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Zuckerberg. I've got a yes or no question, if you could give that. Should Facebook enable illegal online pharmacies to sell drugs such as oxycodone, Percocet, Vicodin without a prescription?
Congressman, I believe that's against our policies.
Yes or no? Do you think you should be able to do that?
No, of course not.
there are 35,000 online pharmacies operating, and according to the FDA, they think there may be 96% of them are operating illegally. And on November of last year, CNBC had an article say that you were surprised by the breadth of this opioid crisis. And as you can see from these photographs, opioids are still available on your site, that they're without a prescription on your site. So it contradicts just what you just said just a minute ago. And it went on last week, FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb has testified before our office, said that the internet firms simply aren't taking practical steps to find and remove these illegal opioid listings. And he specifically mentioned Facebook. Are you aware of that, his quote?
Congressman,
Yes,
I'm not
yes or no?
specifically aware of his quote, but I heard that he said something. And let me just speak to this for a second.
If I could, no, we don't. So in your opening statement, and I appreciated your remark, you said it's not enough to give people a voice. We have to make sure that people aren't using it, Facebook, to hurt people. Now, America's in the midst of one of the worst epidemics that it's ever experienced with this drug epidemic. And it's all across this country. It's not just in West Virginia. But your platform is still being used to circumvent the law and allow people to buy highly addictive drugs without a prescription. You know, with all due respect, Facebook is actually enabling an illegal activity, and in so doing, you are hurting people. Would you agree with that statement?
Congressman, I think that there are a number of areas of content that we need to do a better job policing on our service. Today, the primary way that content regulation works here and review is that people can share what they want openly on the service, and then if someone sees an issue, they can flag it to us, and then we will review it. Over time, we're shifting to a mode
you can
where
find
we're
out,
building...
Mr. Zuckerberg, you know which pharmacies are operating legally and illegally, but you're still continuing to take that, allow that to be posted on Facebook, and allow people to get this scourge, this ravaging this country, is being enabled because of Facebook. So my question to you as we close on this, you've said before you were going to take down those ads, but you didn't do it. We've got statement after statement about things. You're going to take those down within days, and they haven't gone down. That, what I just put up, was just from yesterday. It's still up. So my question to you is, when are you going to take down these posts that are done with illegal digital pharmacies? When are you going to take them down?
Congressman, right now, when people report the post to us, we will take them down and have people review.
Why do they have to, if you've got all these 20,000 people, you know that they're up there. Where's your requirement? Where's your accountability to allow this to be occurring, this ravaging this country?
Congressman, I agree that this is a terrible issue, and respectfully, when there are tens of billions or 100 billion pieces of content that are shared every day, even 20,000 people reviewing it can't look at everything. What we need to do is build more AI tools that can proactively
You've
find
been said
that content.
before you were going to take them down, and you haven't. And they're
Gentleman's
still up.
time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, for 4
Thank you,
minutes.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, you acknowledged candidly that Facebook made a mistake. You did an analysis of how it happened. You promised action. We're at the point where the action will speak much louder than the words. But Mr. Chairman, this Congress has made a mistake. This event that happened, whether it was Facebook or some other platform, was foreseeable and inevitable. And we did nothing about it. Congresswoman Blackburn and I had a group, a privacy working group, 6 meetings with many of the industry players. There was an acknowledgement on both sides that privacy was not being protected, that there was no reasonable safeguard for Americans' privacy, but there was an inability to come to a conclusion. So we also have an obligation. And in an effort to move forward, Mr. Zuckerberg, I've framed some questions that hopefully will allow a reasonable yes or no answer to see if there's some common ground to achieve the goal you assert you have, and we certainly have, the obligation to protect the privacy of American consumers. First, Do you believe that consumers have a right to know and control what personal data companies collect from them?
Yes.
Do you believe that consumers have a right to control how and with whom their personal information is shared with third parties?
Congressman, yes, of course.
And do you believe that consumers have a right to secure and responsible handling of their personal data?
Yes, Congressman.
And do you believe that consumers should be able to easily place limits on the personal data that companies collect and retain?
Congressman, that seems like a reasonable principle to me.
Okay, and do you believe that consumers should be able to correct or delete inaccurate personal data that companies have obtained?
Congressman, that one might be more interesting to debate.
Well, then you get back to us with specifics on that. I think they do have that right. Do you believe that consumers should be able to have their data deleted immediately from Facebook when they stop using the service?
Yes, Congressman, and they have that ability.
Good. And do you believe that the Federal Trade Commission or another properly resourced governmental agency with rulemaking authority should be able to determine on a regular basis what is considered personal information to provide certainty for consumers and companies what information needs to be protected most tightly?
Congressman, I certainly think that that's an area where we should discuss some sort of oversight.
There's not a big discussion here. Who gets the final say? Is it the private market, companies like yours, or is there a governmental function here that defines what privacy is?
Congressman, I think this is an area where some regulation makes sense. You proposed a very specific thing, and I think the details matter.
Let me ask you this. I've appreciated your testimony. Will you work with this committee to help put us, to help the U.S. put in place our own privacy regulation that prioritizes consumers' right to privacy, just as the EU has done?
Congressman, yes, I'll make sure that we work with you to flesh this out.
All right. And you have indicated that Facebook has not always protected the privacy of their users throughout the company's history. And it seems, though, from your answers, that you agree that consumers do have a fundamental right to privacy that empowers them to control the collection, the use, the sharing of their personal information online. And Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, privacy cannot be based just on company policies, whether it's Facebook or any other company. There has to be a willingness on the part of this Congress to step up and provide policy protection to the privacy rights of every American consumer. I yield back.
Fíjense con quién se pelean, cómo se pelean. Hagan caca arriba de quien les diga que tienen malos modos, porque eso es solo una manera de leccionarnos a nosotras las mujeres, que nos pasa de todo desde el primer día en que nacemos. Así que nunca dejen de luchar, como dice Bimbo también. Si sale la ley, no nos la van a hacer fácil. Fíjense con quién se pelean, cómo se pelean las leyes. Hagan caca arriba de quien les diga que tienen malos modos para poder interrumpir una manera de leccionarnos a nosotras las mujeres. Trabajan la culpa.
Local law enforcement in order to help prevent that. I think that is less built out around the world. It is more built out in the U.S. So, for example, on that example, we've built out specific programs in the U.S. We have 3,000 people that are focused on making sure that if we detect that someone is at risk of harming themselves, we can get them the appropriate help.
What about Russian intel agencies?
The second category of information is when there is a valid legal process served to us. In general, if a government puts something out that's overly broad, we're going to fight back on it. We view our duty as protecting people's information, but if there is valid service, especially in the U.S., we will, of course, work with law enforcement. In general, we are not in the business of providing a lot of information to the Russian government.
Do you know, is this data only from accounts located in or operated from these individual countries, or does it include Facebook's global data?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, is the data only from the accounts located in or operated from those countries in terms of Russia or anything, or does it include Facebook's global data?
Well, Congressman, in general, countries do not have jurisdiction to have any valid legal reason to request data of someone outside of their country. But
well, where's it stored? Where's the data? I mean, they have access to data only
we don't
stored
store any data in Russia.
Okay, so it's the global data.
Yeah.
So let me just ask, you mentioned a few times that we're in an arms race with Russia, but is it one-sided if Facebook, as an American-based company, is given the opposition everything it needs in terms of, where it's storing its data?
Sorry, Congressman, could you repeat that?
So you mentioned a few times that we're in an arms race with Russia.
Yes.
If you're giving Russian intelligence service agencies, potentially, even on a valid request, access to global data that's not in Russia, is that kind of a disadvantage to us and an advantage to them?
Congressman, let me be more precise in my testimony.
Yeah, please.
I have no specific knowledge of any data that we've ever given to Russia. In general, we'll work with valid law enforcement requests in different countries, and we can get back to you on what that might mean with Russia specifically, but I have no knowledge sitting here of any time that we would have given them information.
That'd be great. Now, I've got another unique one I want to bring up. So I was just today, and I'm not saying this as a woe is me, but I think this happens to a lot of people. There have been, my pictures have been stolen and used in fake accounts all around, and in many cases, people have been extorted for money. We report it when we can, but we're in a tail chase. In fact, today, I just Googled, or I just put on your website Andrew Kinzinger, and he looks a lot like me, but it says he's from London and lives in LA and went to Locke High School, which isn't anything like me at all. These accounts pop up a lot, and again, it's using my pictures but extorting people for money. And we hear about it from people that call and say, hey, I was duped or whatever. I know you can't control everything. I mean, you have a huge platform, but can you talk about maybe some movements into the future to try to prevent that in terms of maybe recognizing somebody's picture and if it's fake?
Yes, Congressman, this is an important issue, and I mean, fake accounts overall are a big issue because that's how a lot of the other issues that we see around fake news and foreign election interference are happening as well. So long-term, the solution here is to build more AI tools that find patterns of people using the services that no real person would do. And we've been able to do that in order to take down tens of thousands of accounts, especially related to election interference leading up to the French election, the German election, and last year the U.S.-Alabama Senate state election, Senate election, special election. And that's an area where we should be able to extend that work and develop more AI tools that can do this more broadly.
Okay. Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to pick up where Mr. Kinzinger dropped off here. Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook recently announced that a search feature allowing malicious actors to scrape data on virtually all of Facebook's 2 billion users. Yes or no? In 2013, Brandon Copley, the CEO of Giftnix, demonstrated that this feature could easily be used to gather information at scale. Well, the answer to that question is yes. Yes or no? This issue of scraping data was again raised in 2015 by a cybersecurity researcher, correct?
Congressman, I'm not specifically familiar with that. The feature that we identified, I think it was a few weeks ago or a couple weeks ago at this point, was a search feature that allowed people to look up some information that people had publicly shared on their profile. So names, profile pictures,
if I may, Mr. Zuckerberg, I will recognize that Facebook did turn this feature off. My question, and the reason I'm asking about 2013 and 2015, is Facebook knew about this in 2013 and 2015, but you didn't turn the feature off until Wednesday of last week. It's the same feature that Mr. Kinzinger just talked about, where this is essentially a tool for these malicious actors to go and steal someone's identity and put the finishing touches on it. So again, one of your mentors, Roger McNamee, recently said your business is based on trust and you're losing trust. This is a trust question. Why did it take so long, especially when we're talking about some of the other pieces that we get to the bottom of? Your failure to act on this issue has made billions of people potentially vulnerable to identity theft and other types of harm from malicious actors. So on to another subject. Facebook has detailed profiles on people who have never signed up for Facebook, yes or no?
Congressman, in general, we collect data for people who have not signed up for Facebook for security purposes to prevent the kind of scraping that you were just referring to.
So these are called shadow profiles? Is that what they've been referred to by some?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that.
I'll refer to them as shadow profiles for today's hearing. On average, how many data points does Facebook have on each Facebook user?
I do not know off the top of my head.
So the average for non-Facebook platforms is 1,500. It's been reported that Facebook has as many as 29,000 data points for an average Facebook user. Do you know how many points of data that Facebook has on the average non-Facebook user?
Congressman, I do not off the top of my head, but I can have our team get back to you afterwards.
I appreciate that. It's been admitted by Facebook that you do collect data points on non-average users. So my question is, can someone who does not have a Facebook account opt out of Facebook's involuntary data collection?
Congressman, anyone can turn off and opt out of any data collection for ads, whether they use our services or not. But in order to prevent people from scraping public information, which again, the search feature that you brought up only showed public information, people's names and profiles and things that they'd made public, but nonetheless, we don't want people aggregating even public information.
But
so we block that. So we need to know when someone is trying to repeatedly access our services.
If I may, Mr. Zuckerberg, I'm about out of time. It may surprise you that we've not talked about this a lot today. You've said everyone controls their data, but you're collecting data on people that are not even Facebook users, that have never signed a consent, a privacy agreement, and you're collecting their data. And it may surprise you that on Facebook's page, when you go to I don't have a Facebook account and would like to request all my personal data stored by Facebook, it takes you to a form that says go to your Facebook page, and then on your account settings, you can download your data. So you're directing people that don't have access, don't even have a Facebook page, to have to sign up for a page to release their data. We've got to fix that. The last question that I have is, have you disclosed to this committee or to anyone all information Facebook has uncovered about Russian interference on your platform?
Congressman, we are working with the right authorities on that, and I'm happy to answer specific questions here as well.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you being here. Let me state up front that I share the privacy concerns that you've heard from a lot of us, and I appreciate your statements and willingness to, help us figure out a solution that's good for the American people. So I appreciate that. Secondly, I have to say that it's my understanding that yesterday Senator Shelley Moore Capito, my friend in my neighboring state of West Virginia, asked you about Facebook's plans with rural broadband, and you agreed to share that information with her at some point in time, get her up to date and up to speed. I was excited to hear that you were excited about that and passionate about it. My district is very similar to West Virginia as it borders it, and we have a lot of rural areas. Can you also agree, yes or no, to update me on that when the information is available?
Yes, Congressman. We will certainly follow up with you on this. Part of the mission of connecting everyone around the world means that everyone needs to be able to be on the internet. And unfortunately, too much of the internet infrastructure today is too expensive for the current business models of carriers to support a lot of rural communities with the quality of service that they deserve. So we are building a number of specific technologies, from planes that can beam down internet access to repeaters and mesh networks, to make it so that all these communities can be served, and we'd be happy to follow up with you on this. I
appreciate that, and we've got a lot of drone activity going on in our district, whether it's the University of Virginia at Wise or Virginia Tech, so we'd be happy to help out there too. Let me switch gears. You talked about trying to ferret out misinformation, and the question becomes, who decides what is misinformation? So when some of my political opponents put on the Facebook that they think Morgan Griffith is a bum, I think that's misinformation. What say you?
Congressman, without weighing in on that specific piece of content, let me outline the way that we approach fighting fake news in general. There are 3 categories of fake news that we fight. One are basically spammers. They're economic actors like the Macedonian trolls that I think we've all heard about. Basically, folks who don't have an ideological goal. They're just trying to write the most sensational thing they can in order to get people to click on it so they can make money on ads. It's all economics. So the way to fight that is we make it so that they can't run our ads, they can't make money. We make it so that we can detect what they're doing and show it less in newsfeed so they can make less money. When they stop making money, they just go and do something else because they're economically inclined. The second category are basically state actors, right? So what we've found with Russian interference, and those people are setting up fake accounts. So for that, we need to build AI systems that can go and identify a number of their fake account networks. And just last week, we traced back the Russian activity to specific fake account network that Russia had in Russia to influence Russian culture and other Russian-speaking countries around them. And we took down a number of their fake accounts and pages, including a news organization that was sanctioned by the Russian government as a Russian state news organization. So that's a pretty big action, but removing fake accounts is the other way that we can stop the spread of false information.
I appreciate that. My time is running. I do want to point this out, though, as part of that, who's going to decide what is misinformation. We've heard about the Catholic University and the cross. We've heard about a candidate. We've heard about the conservative ladies. A firearm shop, lawful in my district, had a similar problem. It has also been corrected. And so I wonder if the industry has thought about, not only are we looking at it, but has the industry thought about doing something like Underwriters Laboratories, which was set up when electricity was new to determine whether or not the devices were safe. Have you all thought about doing something like that so it's not Facebook alone, but the industry saying, wait a minute, this is probably misinformation, and setting up guidelines that everybody can agree are fair?
Yes, Congressman. That's actually the third category that I was going to get to next after economic spammers and state actors with fake accounts. One of the things that we're doing is working with a number of third parties so if people flag things as false news or incorrect, we run them by third-party fact checkers who are all accredited by this Poynter Institute of Journalism. There are firms of all leanings around this who do this work, and that's an important part of the effort.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, I want to follow up on a question asked by Mr. McNerney, where he talked about visiting websites and the fact that Facebook can track you. And as you visit those websites, you can have that deleted. I'm informed that there's not a way to do that, or are you telling us that you're announcing a new policy?
Congressman, my understanding is that if we have information from you visiting other places, then you have a way of getting access to that and deleting it and making sure that we don't store it anymore. In the specific question that the other congressman asked, I think it's possible that we just didn't have the information that he was asking about in the first place, and that's why it wasn't there.
Well, 3 billion user accounts were breached at Yahoo in 2013, 145 million at eBay in 2014, 143 million at Equifax in 2017, 78 million at Anthem in 2015, 76 million at JP Morgan Chase in 2014. The list goes on and on. The security of all that private data is gone, likely sold many times over to the highest bidder on the dark web. We live in an information age. Data breaches and privacy hacks are not a question of if, they are a question of when. But the case with Facebook is slightly different. The 87 million accounts extracted by Cambridge Analytica are just the beginning, with likely dozens of other third parties that have accessed this information. As far as we know, the dam is still broken. As you have noted, Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook's business model is based on capitalizing on the private personal information of your users. Data security should be a central pillar of this model. And with your latest vast breach of privacy and the widespread political manipulation that followed it, the question this committee must ask itself is what role the federal government should play in protecting the American people and the democratic institutions that your platform and others like it have put at risk. In this case, you gave permission to mine the data of some 87 million users based on the deceptive consent of just a fraction of that number. When they found out I was going to be speaking with you today, my constituents asked me to share some of their concerns in person. How can they protect themselves on your platform? Why should they trust you again with their likes, their loves, their lives? Users trusted Facebook to prioritize user privacy and data security, and that trust has been shattered. I'm encouraged that Facebook is committed to making changes, but I am indeed wary that you are only acting now out of concern for your brand and only making changes that should have been made a long time ago. You have described this as an arms race, but every time we saw what precautions you have, or in most cases have not taken, your company is caught unprepared and ready to issue another apology. I'm left wondering again why Congress should trust you again. We'll be watching you closely to ensure that Facebook follows through on these commitments. Many of my constituents have asked about your business model, where users are the product. Mary of Half Moon in my district called it infuriating. Andy of Schenectady, New York asked, why doesn't Facebook pay its users for their incredibly valuable data? Facebook claims that users rightly own and control their data, yet their data keeps being exposed on your platform, and these breaches cause more and more harm each time. You have said that Facebook was built to empower its users. Instead, users are having their information abused with absolutely no recourse. In light of this harm, what liability should Facebook have? When users' data is mishandled, who is responsible and what recourse do users have? Do you bear that liability?
Congressman, I think we're responsible for protecting people's information for sure. But one thing that you said that I want to provide some clarity on.
Do you bear the liability?
Well, you said earlier, you referenced that you thought that we were only taking action after this came to light. Actually, we made significant changes to the platform in 2014 that would have made this incident with Cambridge Analytica impossible to happen again today. I wish we'd made those changes a couple of years earlier, because this poll app got people to use it back in 2013 and 2014. And if we had made the changes a couple of years earlier, then we would have.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes.
Mr. Chairman, if I might ask that other questions that my constituents have be entered by unanimous consent.
Without objection, of course. That goes for all members. Chair recognizes gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it, and thanks for your testimony, Mr. Zuckerberg. Well, first of all, I wanted to follow up with Mr. McKinley's testimony. This is bad stuff, Mr. Zuckerberg, with regard to the illegal online pharmacies. When are those ads? I mean, when are you going to take those off? I think we need an answer to that. I think they need to get off. We need to get these off as soon as possible. Can you give us an answer, a clear answer as to when these pharmacies? We have an epidemic here with regard to the opioids. I think we're owed a clear answer, a definitive answer as to when these ads will be offline.
Congressman, if people flag those ads for us, we will take them down now.
Now?
Yes.
By the end of the day?
If people flag them for us, we will look at them as quickly as we can.
Well, you have knowledge now, obviously. You have knowledge. You have knowledge of those ads. Will you begin to take them down today?
The ads that are flagged for us, we will review and take down if they violate our policies, which I believe the ones that you're talking about do.
They clearly do. If they're illegal, they clearly violate your policy.
Which they do. But what I think really needs to happen here is not just us reviewing content that gets flagged for us. We need to be able to build tools that can proactively go out and identify what might be these ads for opioids before people even have to flag them for us to review.
I agree.
And that's going to be a longer-term thing in order to build that solution. But today, if someone flags the ads for us, we will take them down.
Work on those tools as soon as possible, please. Okay, next question. A constituent of mine in District 12 of Florida, the Tampa Bay area, came to me recently with what was a clear violation of your privacy policy. In this case, a third-party organization publicly posted personal information about my constituent on his Facebook page. This included his home address, voting record, degrading photos, and other information. In my opinion, this is cyberbullying. For weeks, my constituent tried reaching out to Facebook on multiple occasions through its report feature, but the offending content remained. It was only when my office got involved that the posts were removed almost immediately for violating Facebook policy. How does Facebook's self-reporting policy work to prevent misuse, and why did it take an act of Congress, a member of Congress, to get, again, a clear privacy violation removed from Facebook? If you can answer that question, I'd appreciate it, please.
Congressman, that clearly sounds like a big issue and something that would violate our policies. I don't have specific knowledge of that case, but what I imagine happened, given what you just said, is they reported it to us, and one of the people who reviews content probably made an enforcement error. And then when you reached out, we probably looked at it again and realized that it that it violated the policies and took it down. We have a number of steps that we need to take to improve the accuracy of our enforcement.
Absolutely.
That's a big issue. We
has
need to
to
get
be
content
consistency.
faster, and we need to be able to do better at this. I think the same solution to the opioid question that you raised earlier, of doing more with automated tools, will lead to both faster response times and more accurate enforcement of the policies.
Can you give us a timeline as to when will this be done? I mean, this is very critical for our, I mean, listen, my family uses Facebook, my friends, my constituents, we all use Facebook. I use Facebook. It's wonderful for our seniors to connect with their relatives.
Gentleman's time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I submit for the record my additional questions?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank
Without
you so much.
objection.
Mr.
Chair
Chairman.
recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, for 4 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming before us, Mr. Zuckerman, today. I want to take the opportunity to represent the concerns of the newly formed Tech Accountability Caucus, in which I serve as a co-chair with my colleagues, Representative Robin Kelly, Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver, and Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman, but most importantly, people in our country and around the globe who are in vulnerable populations, including those who look just like me. My first question to you is, as you may be aware, there have been numerous media reports about how more than 3,000 Russian ads were bought on Facebook to incite racial and religious division and chaos in the U.S. during the 2016 election. Those ads specifically characterized and weaponized African-American groups like Black Lives Matter, in which ads suggested through propaganda or fake news, as people call it these days, that they were a rising threat. Do you think that the lack of diversity, culturally competent personnel in your C-suite and throughout your organization, in which your company did not detect or disrupt and investigate these claims, are a problem in this regard?
Congresswoman, I agree that we need to work on diversity. In this specific case, I don't think that that was the issue, because we were frankly slow to identifying the whole Russian misinformation operation and not just that specific example. Going forward, we're going to address this by verifying the identity of every single advertiser who's running political or issue-oriented ads, to make it so that foreign actors or people trying to spoof their identity or say that they're someone that they're not cannot run political ads or run large pages of the type.
So whether they were Russian or not, when you have propaganda, how are you addressing that? Because this was extremely harmful during the last election cycle, and can continue to be so in the upcoming elections and throughout the year, right? I'm concerned that there are not eyes that are culturally competent looking at these things and being able to see how this would impact on civil society. If everyone within the organization is monolithic, then you can miss these things very easily. And we've talked about diversity forever with your organization. What can you say today when you look at how all of this operates, that you can do immediately to make sure that we have the types of viewing or reviewing that could enable us to catch this in its tracks?
Congresswoman, we announced a change in how we're going to review ads and big pages, so that now, going forward, we're going to verify the identity and location of every advertiser who's running political or issue ads, or and the identities.
Good. We'd like you to get back to us with a timeline on that.
Oh, that will be in place for these elections.
Okay, fabulous. When Mr. Kogan sold the Facebook-based data that he acquired through the Quiz app to Cambridge Analytica, did he violate Facebook's policies at the time?
Yes, Congresswoman.
When the Obama campaign collected millions of Facebook users' data through their own app during the 2012 election, did it violate Facebook's policies at the time?
No, Congresswoman, it did not.
I hope you understand that this distinction provides little comfort to those of us concerned about our privacy online. Regardless of political party, Americans desperately need to be protected. Democrats on this committee have been calling for strong privacy and data security legislation for years. We really can't wait, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr.
4
Chairman.
minutes.
Mr. Zuckerberg, thanks for joining us today. Let me add my name to the list of folks that you're going to get back to on the rural broadband internet access question. Please add my name to that list.
Of course.
I got a lot of those folks in my district. You know, you're a real American success story. There's no question that you and Facebook have revolutionized the way Americans, in fact, the world, communicate and interconnect with one another. I think one of the reasons that you were able to do that is because nowhere other than here in America, where a young man in college can pursue his dreams and ambitions on his own terms without a big federal government over-regulating them and telling them what they can and cannot do, could you have achieved something like this. But in the absence of federal regulations that would reel that in, the only way it works for the betterment of society and people is with a high degree of responsibility and trust. And you've acknowledged that there have been some breakdowns in responsibility. And I think sometimes, and I'm a technology guy. I have 2 degrees in computer science. I'm a software engineer. I'm a patent holder. So I know the challenges that you face in terms of managing the technology. But oftentimes technology folks spend so much time thinking about what they can do and little time thinking about what they should do. And so I want to talk about some of those should do kind of things. You heard earlier about faith-based material that had been taken down, ads that had been taken down. You admitted that it was a mistake. That was in my district, by the way, Franciscan University. A faith-based university was the one that did that. How is your content filtered and determined to be appropriate or not appropriate and policy compliant? Is it an algorithm that does it, or is there a team of a gazillion people that sit there and look at each and every ad that make that determination?
Congressman, it's a combination of both. So at the end of the day, we have community standards that are written out and try to be very clear about what is acceptable. And we have a large team of people. As I said, by the end of this year, we're going to have about more than 20,000 people working on security and content review across the company. But in order to flag some content quickly, we also build technical systems in order to take things down. So if we see terrorist content, for example, we'll flag that, and we can take that down.
What do you do when you find someone or something that's made a mistake? I mean, I've heard you say several times today that you know a mistake has been made. What kind of accountability is there when mistakes are made? Because every time a mistake like that is made, it's a little bit of a chip away from the trust and the responsibility factors. How do you hold people accountable in Facebook when they make those kind of mistakes of taking stuff down that shouldn't be taken down or leaving stuff up that should not be left up?
Congressman, for content reviewers specifically, their performance is going to be measured by whether they do their job accurately. And
you ever fire anybody when they do stuff like that?
I'm sure we do. As part of the normal course of running a company, you're hiring and firing people all the time to grow your capacity and
what happened to the person that took down the Franciscan University ad and didn't put it back up until the media started getting involved?
Congressman, I'm not specifically aware of that case.
Can you take that question for me? My time has expired. Can you take that question for me and get me that answer back, please?
We will.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Loebsack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing today, and I want to thank Mr. Zuckerberg for being here today as well. Add my name to the rural broadband list as well. I have 1/4 of Iowa, the southeast part of Iowa. We definitely need more help on that front. Thank you. You may recall last year, Mr. Zuckerberg, that you set out to visit every state in the country. to meet different people. And one of those places you visited was, in fact, Iowa, my home state of Iowa, and you did visit the district that I proudly represent, and you met some of my constituents. As you began your tour, you said that you believed in connecting the world and giving everyone a voice, and that, quote, you wanted, quote, to personally hear more of those voices. I'm going to do the same thing in just a second that a number of my colleagues did and just ask you some questions that were submitted to my Facebook page by some of my constituents. I do want to say at the outset, though, and I do ask for unanimous consent to enter all those questions into the record, Mr. Chair.
Without objection.
I think trust has been the issue today. There's no question about it. I think that's what I'm hearing from my constituents. That's what we're hearing from our colleagues. That's really the question. How can we be guaranteed that, for example, when you agree to some things today, that you're going to follow through and that we're going to be able to hold you accountable, and without perhaps constructing too many rules and regulations. We'd like to keep that to a minimum if we possibly can, but I do understand that you have agreed that we're going to have some rules and regulations so that we can protect people's privacy, so that we can protect that use of the consumer data. So going forward from there, I've just got a few questions I'll probably have an opportunity to get to. The first one goes to the business model issue, because you're publicly traded, is that correct?
Yes.
And you're the CEO?
Yes.
Right. And so I've got Lauren from Solon who asks, is it possible for Facebook to exist without collecting and selling our data? Is it possible to exist?
Congressman, we don't sell people's data. So I think that that's an important thing to clarify up front. And then in terms of collecting data, I mean, the whole purpose of the service is that you can share the things that you want with the people around you, right, or and your friends. So
Is it possible for you to be in business without sharing the data, because that's what you have done, whether it was selling or not, sharing the data, providing it to Cambridge Analytica and other folks along the way? Is it possible for your business to exist without doing that?
Well, Congressman, it would be possible for our business to exist without having a developer platform. It would not be possible for our business to, or our products or our services or anything that we do to exist without having the opportunity for people to go to Facebook, put in the content that they want to share and who they want to share it with, and then go do that. That's the core thing.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And then Brenda from Muscatine, she has a question obviously related to trust as well, and that is, how will changes promised this time be proven to be completed? She'd like to know, how's that going to happen? If there are changes, and you said there have been some changes, how can she and those folks in our districts and throughout America, not just members of Congress, but how can folks in our districts hold you accountable? How do they know that those changes are in fact going to happen? That's what that question's about.
Congressman, for the developer platform changes that we announced, they're implemented. We're putting those into place. We announced a bunch of specific things. It's on our blog, and I wrote it in my written testimony, and that stuff is happening. We're also going back and investigating every single app that had access to a large amount of data before we locked down the platform in the past. We will tell people if we find anything that misused their data, and we will tell people when the investigation is complete.
Thank you. And finally, Chad from Scott County wants to know, who has my data other than Cambridge Analytica?
Congressman, part of what I just said is that we're going to do an investigation of every single app that had access to a large amount of people's data. If you signed into another app, then that app probably has access to some of your data. And part of the investigation that we're going to do is to determine whether those app developers did anything improper or shared that data further beyond that. And if we find anything like that, we will tell people that their data was misused.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here today. On a voluntary basis, I want to put that out here. You were not subpoenaed to be here, as Mr. Barton offered up a little bit ago. You're the only witness at the table today. We've had 10 people at that table, to give you an idea of what kind of hearings we've had in here. Not too long ago, we had 10. And I'd say that if we invited everyone that had read your terms of agreement, terms of service, we could probably fit them at that table. I also would say that I represent 751,000 people, and out of that 751,000 people, the people in my area that are really worked up about this Facebook and about this hearing today would also fit with you there at the table. So I'm not getting the outcry from my constituents about what's going on with Cambridge Analytica and this user agreement and everything else. But there are some things that I think you need to be concerned about. One question I'd like to ask before I go into my questioning is, what was Face Smash, and is it still up and running?
No, Congressman. Face Smash was a prank website that I launched in college in my dorm room before I started Facebook. There was a movie about this, or it said it was about this. It was of unclear truth. And that claimed that Face Smash was somehow connected to the development of Facebook. It isn't. It wasn't.
Just
and
coincidental.
Face Smash isn't
The timing was the same, right? Just coincidental?
It was in 2003.
Okay.
And I took it down, and it actually has nothing to do with it.
You put up pictures of two women and decide which one was the better, more attractive of the two. Is that right?
Congressman, that is an accurate description of the prank website that I made when I was a sophomore in college.
But from that beginning, whether it was actually the beginning of Facebook or not, you've come a long way. Jan Schakowsky, Congressman Schakowsky this morning said self-regulation simply does not work. Mr. Butterfield, Representative Butterfield, said that you need more African-American inclusion on your board of directors. If I was you, a little bit of advice, Congress is good at two things: doing nothing and overreacting. So far, we've done nothing on Facebook. Since your inception in that Harvard dorm room many years ago, we've done nothing on Facebook. We're getting ready to overreact. So just take that as a shot across the bow warning to you. You've got a good outfit there on your front row behind you, that very bright folks. You're Harvard educated. I have a Yale hat that cost me $160,000. That's as close as I ever got to an Ivy League school. But I'd like to show you right now a little picture here. You recognize these folks?
I do.
Who are they?
I believe, is that Diamond and Silk?
That is Diamond and Silk, two biological sisters from North Carolina. I might point out they're African American. And their content was deemed by your folks to be unsafe. So, you know, I don't know what type of a picture this is, if it was taken in a police station or what, in a lineup, but apparently they've been deemed unsafe. Diamond and Silk have a question for you, and that question is, what is unsafe about two black women supporting President Donald J. Trump?
Well, Congressman, nothing is unsafe about that. The specifics of this situation, I'm not as up to speed on as I probably would be if I didn't have a hearing that
You have 20,000 employees, as you said, to check content, and I would suggest, as good as you are with analytics, that those 20,000 people, you do some analytical research and see how many conservative websites have been pulled down and how many liberal websites. One of our talk show hosts at home, Nick Reed, this morning on the radio said that if Diamond and Silk were liberal, they'd be on the late night talk show circuit back and forth. They're humorous, they have their opinion, not that you have to agree or that I have to agree, do agree, don't agree with them. But the fact that they're conservative, and I just remember, if you don't remember anything else from this hearing here today, remember, we do nothing and we overreact. And we're getting ready to overreact, so I would suggest you go home and review all these other things people have accused you of today. Get with your good team there behind you. You're the guy to fix this. We're not. You need to save your ship. Thank you.
Gentleman's time
Mr.
is
Chairman,
expired.
since my name was mentioned, can I just respond?
I tell you, if we could move on, just because we're going to run out of time for members down dais to be able to ask their questions.
Okay, I consider Billy Long a good friend. Let me just say that I don't think it was a breach of decorum, and I just take issue with his saying that a very modest bill that I've introduced is an overreach. That's all.
I didn't say it was an overreach. All I said was that I would just let him remind him of several.
Now recognize the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Schrader, for questions.
Thank you,
4
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman. I appreciate that. Mr. Zuckerberg, again, thank you for being here. Appreciate your good offices and voluntarily coming before us. You have testified that you voluntarily took Cambridge Analytica's word that they had deleted information, found out subsequently that they did not delete that information, have sent in your own forensics team, which I applaud. I just want to make sure and get some questions answered here. Can you tell us that they were told not to destroy any data, misappropriated data they may find?
Congressman, so you're right that in 2015, when we found out that the app developer Alexander Kogan had sold data to Cambridge Analytica. We reached out to them. At that point, we demanded that they delete all the data that they had. They told us at that point that they had done that. And then a month ago, we heard a new report that said that, that they actually hadn't done that.
But I'm talking about the direction you've given your forensic team. Now, if they find stuff, they're not to delete it at this point in time, or are they going to go ahead and delete it?
The audit team that we are sending in?
Right.
The first order of business is to understand exactly what happened. And
I'm
we're
worried
doing
about the information being deleted without law enforcement having the opportunity to actually review that. Will you commit to this committee that neither Facebook nor its agents have removed any information or evidence from Cambridge Analytica's offices?
Congressman, I do not believe that we have. And
how about Mr. Kogan's office, if I may ask?
One specific point on this is that our audit in the of Cambridge Analytica, we've paused that in order to cede to the UK government, which is conducting its own government audit, which of course, an investigation, which of course takes precedence.
With all due respect, what I'm getting at is I'd like to have the information available for the UK or US law enforcement officials, and I did not hear you commit to that. Will you commit to the committee that Facebook has not destroyed any data or records that may be relevant to any federal, state, or international law enforcement investigation?
Congressman, yes. What I'm saying is that the UK government is going to complete its investigation before we go in and do our audit, so they will have full access to all the information.
So you've suspended your audit pending the UK's investigation?
Yes, we've paused it pending theirs.
So it's my understanding that you and other Facebook executives have the ability to rescind or delete messages that are on people's websites. To be clear, I just want to make sure that if that is indeed the case, that after you've deleted that information, that somehow law enforcement, particularly relevant to this case, would still have access to those messages.
Congressman, yes. We have a document retention policy of the company where for some people we delete emails after a period of time, but we, of course, preserve anything that there's a legal hold on.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. While you've testified very clearly that you do not sell information, it's not Facebook's model. You do the advertising and obviously have other means of revenue. But it's pretty clear others do sell that information. Doesn't that make you somewhat complicit in what they're doing? You're allowing them to sell the information that they glean from your website?
Well, Congressman, I would disagree that we allow it. We actually expressly prohibit any developer that people
How do you enforce that? That's my concern. How do you enforce that? Complaint only is what I've heard so far tonight.
Yes, Congressman. Some of it is in response to reports that we get, and some of it is we do spot checks to make sure that the apps are actually doing what they say they're doing. And going forward, we're going to increase the number of audits that we do as well.
So last question is it's my understanding based on the testimony here today that even after I'm off of Facebook, that you guys still have the ability to follow my web interactions. Is that correct?
Congressman,
I've logged out of Facebook. Do you still have the ability to follow my interactions on the web?
Congressman, you have control over what we do for ads and the information collection around that. On security, there may be specific things about how you use Facebook, even if you're not logged in, that we keep track of to make sure that people aren't abusing the systems.
Gentleman's time has expired. And just for our members who haven't had a chance to ask questions, we will pause at 1:30. Well, we will have votes at 1:40. We will continue the hearing after a brief pause, and we'll coordinate that. We'll go now to Dr. Bashan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. There are plenty of anecdotal examples, including from family members of mine, where people will be verbally discussing items, never having actually been on the internet at the time. And then the next time they get on Facebook or other online apps, ads for things that they were verbally discussing with each other will show up. And I know you said in the Senate that Facebook doesn't specifically listen to what people are saying through their phone, whether that's a Google phone or whether it's Apple or another one. However, the other day, my mother-in-law and I were discussing her brother who had been deceased for about 10 years, and later on that evening on her Facebook site she had set to music kind of a in memoriam picture collage that came up on Facebook specifically to her brother, and that happened the other night. So if you're not listening to us on the phone, who is, and do you have specific contracts with these companies that will provide data that is being acquired verbally through our phones, or now through things like Alexa or other products?
Congressman, we're not collecting any information verbally on the microphone, and we don't have contracts with anyone else who is. The only time that we might use the microphone is when you're recording a video or doing something where you intentionally are trying to record audio, but we don't have anything that is trying to listen to what's going on in the background.
Okay, because, I mean, like I said, I mean, you've talked to people that this has happened to. My son, who lives in Chicago, him and his colleagues were talking about a certain type of suit because they're business guys, and the next day he had a bunch of ads for different suits on it when he went onto the internet. So it's pretty obvious to me that someone is listening to the audio on our phones, and that I see that as a pretty big issue. And the reason is because, and you may not be, but I see it as a pretty big issue because, for example, if you're in your doctor's office, if you're in your corporate boardroom, your office, or even personal areas of your home, that's potentially an issue. And I'm glad to hear that Facebook isn't listening, but I'm skeptical that someone isn't. And I see this as an industry-wide issue that you could potentially help address. And the final thing I'll just ask is that when you have, say, an executive session or whatever, your corporate board, and you have decisions to be made, do you allow the people in the room to have their phones on them?
Congressman, we do. I don't think we have a policy that says that your phone can't be on. And again, I'm not familiar with, Facebook doesn't do this, and I'm not familiar with other companies that do either. My understanding is that a lot of these cases that you're talking about are a coincidence, or someone might be talking about something, but then they also go to a website or interact with it on Facebook because they were talking about it, and then maybe they'll see the ad because of that, which is a much clearer statement of the intent.
Okay, because if that's the case, then, I mean, I know for convenience, companies have developed things like Alexa, and I don't want to and other companies are developing things like that. But it just seems to me that the whole point of those products is not just for your own convenience, but when you're verbally talking about things and you're not on the internet, they are able to collect information on the type of activities that you're engaging in. So I'd implore the industry to look into that and make sure that, in addition to physical exploring the internet and collecting data, that data being taken verbally not be allowed. Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience and over both days of testimony. You spoke about the framing of your testimony about privacy, security, and democracy. I want to ask you about privacy and democracy, because I think obviously those are linked. You have said over the course of questioning yesterday and today that users own all of their data. So I want to make sure that we drill down on that a little bit, and I think our colleagues have tried. That includes, I believe, that the information that Facebook requires users to make public. So that would be a profile picture, gender, age range, all of which is public-facing information. That's right?
Yes.
Okay. So can advertisers then, understanding that you, Facebook, maintain the data, you're not selling that to anybody else, but advertisers clearly end up having access through that through agreements with you about how they then target ads to me, to you, to any other user. Can advertisers in any way use non-public data, so data that individuals would not think is necessarily public, so that they can target their ads?
Congressman, the way this works is, let's say you have a business that is selling skis, okay, and you have on your profile that you are interested in skiing, but let's say you haven't made that public, but you share it with your friends, or, so broadly. We don't tell the advertiser that here's a list of people who like skis. They just say, okay, we're trying to sell skis. Can you reach people who like skis? And then we match that up on our side without sharing any of that information.
Understood. You don't share that, but they get access to that information so that if they know that they want to market skis to me because I like skis. On the realm of data that is accessible to them, does Facebook include deleted data?
Congressman, no. Okay. And I also would push back on the idea that we're giving them access to the data. we allow them to reach people who said that on Facebook, but we're not giving them access to the data.
Fair. So can advertisers either directly or indirectly get access to or use the metadata that Facebook collects in order to more specifically target ads? So that would include, I know you've talked a lot about how Facebook would use access to information for folks that, well, I might be able to opt in or out about your ability to track me to other websites. Is that used by those advertisers as well?
Congressman, I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Essentially, does the advertisers that are using your platform, do they get access to information that the user does not actually think is either one, being generated, or two, is public? Understanding that, yes, if you dive into the details of your platform, users might be able to shut that off. But I think one of the challenges with trust here is that there's an awful lot of information that's generated that people don't think that they're generating, and that advertisers are being able to target because Facebook collects it.
Yes. So, Congressman, my understanding is that the targeting options that are available for advertisers are generally things that are based on what people share. Now, once an advertiser chooses how they want to target something, Facebook also does its own work to help rank and determine which ads are going to be interesting to which people. So we may use metadata or other behaviors of what you've shown that you're interested in a newsfeed or other places in order to make our systems more relevant to you. But that's a little bit different from giving that as an option to an advertiser, if that makes sense.
Right. But then I guess the question back to, and I only got 20 seconds, I think one of the rubs that you're hearing is I don't understand how users then own that data. I think that's part of the rub. Second, you focus a lot of your testimony and the questions on the individual privacy aspects of this, but we haven't talked about the societal implication of it. And I think while I applaud some of the reforms that you're putting forward, the underlying issue here is that your platform has become a mix of 2 seconds. News, entertainment, social media, that is up for manipulation. We've seen that with a foreign actor. If the changes to individual privacy don't seem to be sufficient to address that underlying issue.
Time has expired.
Love your comments on that at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Chair to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here today. I'm up here, top row. I'm certain that there are other things you'd rather be doing. The activities of Facebook and other technology companies should not surprise us. I mean, we've seen it before, and again, don't take this critically, but we saw a large oil company become a monopoly back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We saw a large telecommunications company become a near monopoly in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And just as Facebook, these companies were founded by bright entrepreneurs, their companies grew, and eventually they sometimes became detached from everyday Americans. And what happened is policymakers then had to step in and reestablish the balance between those folks and everyday Americans. You didn't intend for this to happen. It did happen, and I appreciate that you've apologized for it. And one of the things I appreciate about Facebook, it appears you're proactively trying to address the situation. Just as we addressed those monopolies in the past, we're faced with that situation today. We need to, and this goes beyond Facebook. This has to do with the edge providers. It has to do with social media organizations and also with ISPs. Back to Facebook in particular, though, we heard examples yesterday during the Senate hearing and also today during this hearing so far about ideological bias among the users of Facebook. In my Texas district, I had a retired school teacher whose conservative postings were banned or stopped. The good news is I was able to work with Facebook's personnel and get her reinstated. That said, the Facebook censors still seem to be trying to stop her postings, and anything you can do in that regard to fix that bias will go a long way. I want to move a different direction. That's to talk about the future. Congress needs to consider policy responses, as I said earlier, and I want to call this policy response Privacy 2.0 and Fairness 2.0. With respect to fairness, I think the technology companies should be ideologically agnostic regarding their users' public-facing activities. The only exception would be for potentially violent behavior. I'll ask my question is on this. Do you agree that Facebook and other technology platforms should be ideologically neutral?
Congressman, I agree that we should be a platform for all ideas, and that we should focus on that.
Good. I've got limited time. With respect to privacy, I think that we need to set a baseline. When we talk about a virtual person that each technology user establishes online, their name, address, their online purchases, geolocation data, websites visited, pictures, etc., I think that the individual owns the virtual person that they've set up online. My second question is this. You said earlier that each user owns their virtual presence. Do you think that this concept should apply to all technology providers, including social media platforms, edge providers, and ISPs?
Congressman, yes. In general, I mean, I think that people own their information.
Thank you. I'm not trying to cut you off. You can provide more information supplementally after, if you don't mind. In this regard, I believe that if Congress enacts privacy standards for technology providers, just as we have for financial institutions, healthcare, employee benefits, et cetera, the policy should state that the data of technology users should be held privately unless they specifically consent to the use of the data by others. This release should be based upon the absolute transparency as to what data will be used, how it will be processed, where it will be stored, what algorithms will be applied to it, who will have access to it, if it will be sold, and to whom it might be sold. The disclosure of this information and the associated opt-in actions should be easy to understand and easier for non-technical users to execute. The days of the long scrolling fine print disclosures with a single check mark at the bottom should end. In this regard, based on my use of Facebook, I think you've come a long way toward meeting that objective. I think we must move further. I'll have two other questions to submit later. And thank you. You can expand on your responses to my earlier questions later. Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from California for 4 minutes. Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you very much. Seems like we've been here forever, don't you think? Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, for holding this important hearing. I'm of the opinion that basically we're hearing from one of the leaders, the CEO of one of the biggest corporations in the world, but yet almost entirely in an environment that is unregulated, or for basic terms, that the lanes in which you're supposed to operate in are very wide and broad, unlike other industries. Yet at the same time, I have a chart here of the growth of Facebook. Congratulations to you and your shareholders. It shows that in 2009, your net value of the company was less than, or revenue was less than $1 billion. And then you look all the way over to 2016, it was in excess of $26 billion. And then in 2017, apparently about close to $40 billion. Are those numbers relatively accurate about the growth and the phenomenon of Facebook?
Congressman, they sound relatively accurate.
Okay. Just so you know, it just brought to my attention, my staff texted me a little while ago that the CEO of Cambridge Analytica apparently stepped down sometime today. I don't know if anybody of your team there whispered that to you, but my staff just reported that. That's interesting. The fact that the CEO of Cambridge Analytica stepped down, does that in and of itself solve the issue and the controversy around what they did?
Congressman, I don't think so. There are a couple of big issues here. One is what happened specifically with Cambridge Analytica. How were they able to buy data from a developer that people chose to share it with? And how do we make sure that that can't happen again?
But some of that information did originate with Facebook, correct?
People had it on Facebook and then chose to share theirs and some of their friends' information with this developer, yes.
Something was brought to my attention most recently that apparently Facebook does in fact actually buy information to add or augment the information that you have on some of your users to build around them, their profile?
Congressman, we just recently announced that we were stopping working with data brokers as part of the ad system.
But you did do that to build your company in the past.
It's an industry standard ad practice, and recently, upon examining all of our systems, we decided that's not a thing that we want to be a part of, even if everyone else is doing it.
But you did engage in that as well, not just everybody else, but Facebook yourselves, you did engage in that.
Yes, until we announced that we're shutting it down, yes.
Okay. It's my understanding that when The Guardian decided to report on the Cambridge Analytica consumer data issue, Facebook threatened to sue them if they went forward with their story. It appears, did it happen something like that? Facebook kind of warned them like, hey, maybe you don't want to do that?
Congressman, I don't believe that. I think that there may have been a specific factual inaccuracy that we.
So in other words, you checking The Guardian and saying you're not going to want to go out with that story because it's not 100% factual.
On a specific point, yes.
Okay. Now, however, they did go through with their story, regardless of the warnings or the threats of Facebook saying that you're not going to want to do that. When they did do that, and only then did Facebook actually apologize for that incident, for that 89 million users' information, unfortunately, ending up in their hands. Isn't that the case?
Congressman, you're right that we apologized after they posted the story. They had most of the details of what was right there, and I don't think we objected to that.
Thank you.
Specific things.
Okay, but I only have a few more seconds. My main point is this. I think it's time that you, Facebook, if you want to truly be a leader in all the sense of the word and recognize that you can, in fact, do right by American users of Facebook, and when it comes to information, unfortunately, getting in the wrong hands, you can be a leader. Are you committed to actually being a leader in that sense?
Chairman, the gentleman's time.
Can you give a 2-second answer?
Sure.
Congressman, I am definitely committed to taking a broader view of our responsibility. That's what my testimony is about, making sure that we don't just give people tools, but make sure that they're used for good.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And with that, we will recess for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We'll recess for 10 minutes and then resume the hearing.